D. Oh, there. That seemed to work. But I still don't think I'm on there. I mean, that I'm... Well, my name's there. Oh, maybe we're supposed to turn it off. Yes, okay. I understand. It's muted. They're saying muted. Doesn't mean that I won't be able to hear. I don't. No, it hasn't started.
Dear participants, we're just waiting for our principal ma'am to arrive. So once she arrives, we will start with the program immediately. Please stay tuned.
Yeah, will it disturb you? Yes, please. Thank you.
I told her, the door was shut.
That's fine with me.
Hello? Hello?
Good afternoon, ma'am. We can listen to you now.
I am visible, audible both?
Yes,
am I visible?
Yeah, you're visible. You're visible.
You are audible
Yes,
now.
ma'am, you're visible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is some technical problem, but I am in time. Now this is 1:30. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, with your permission, should we start the webinar?
Yes, but there is a problem with me. Yes, I can't. I am not visible now, no?
Ma'am, you are not visible. Somebody else is presenting. Give me a minute. Shivani, can you please remove Diksha Singh from the meeting? She's presenting her screen so that ma'am is visible. Ma'am, you're visible now. You're visible now.
Can I know who's presenting now?
Keyboard J.
Dr. Shivani, the master of ceremony for today. Please begin. We have the green signal from Principal Ma'am. Let's start with the webinar.
Okay. Namaste, myself Dr. Shivani Kushwaha, Assistant Professor. I very warmly welcome everyone present over here for the webinar, A Crisis for Sustainability. I greet each and everyone on the behalf of Department of Banking and Finance, Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Kendra National PG College, Lucknow. A very famous quote said by Barbara Watt, "We have forgotten how to be a good guest, how to walk lightly on the earth as its other creatures do." The pandemic that we are going is the last costly warning that the system we live on is not sustainable anymore. The pandemic should be considered as an opportunity to make a new environment friendly economy in order to work towards a better world, not to recover the old normal, but resetting the era in the post pandemic era. Now, moving towards the webinar, we are glad to inform you that today, along with having eminent speakers, academicians, scholars, we have received over 900 registrations not only from India but from 58 universities and colleges outside India. Now, I request Dr. Diksha Sharma, Head of Department and convener of the webinar, to tell about our department and the relevance of the webinar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kushwaha. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. We at National PG College Lucknow firmly believe in this philosophy and are constantly striving to achieve the highest academic standards. This webinar is one such effort in the long list of our endeavors. We are glad to have received such a tremendous response from the audience across the globe. National PG College is consistently listed amongst the top colleges in India. We have the status of NAC A grade CPE, which is College with Potential for Excellence, and we are the only autonomous college of university. One such feather to our caps was added in 2014 when the Government of India launched the Skill India Mission. And we were amongst the first few educational institutions to have received the coveted UGC grant for establishing a dedicated skill-based education center called the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Kendra. We are currently running 6 undergraduate and postgraduate programs under banking and finance and software development and e-governance at the Kendra, and are in process of approval for a skill-based doctoral research program also, which will be the first of its kind in the country. Skill India mission of the Government of India has recently completed its 5 years on July 15th, 2020. And National PG College has consistently worked towards skilling the workforce for the economic benefit of our country. So far, over 500 students have been successfully placed, and over 87% of these students have been placed, and over 596 students are presently enrolled in the skill-based programs. The vocational programs at National PG College have received exceptional response from the society at large, and we are the only center in the region to run the program successfully. How do we achieve this? To achieve this, we have the 60% of our faculties directly comes from the industry, and we have signed over 27 memorandum of understanding with various companies across the globe. In the present tough times, Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Kendra shifted to online teaching methodology way back in April 2020, and webinars have been an essential part of our pedagogy. Department of Software Development and E-Governance has also recently organized a webinar, and today we have gathered here to discuss the very relevance of human existence, how we owe so much to our mother nature and how it should reflect on our economic and developmental activities. It could not be a more pertinent time to understand sustainability, and for that we have the world-renowned Professor David Crowther and Professor V.K. Singh to grace the occasion today. I cannot express in words how grateful I am as the convener of the webinar and on the behalf of the department and the college to have such eminent personalities like Professor V.K. Singh and Professor Crowther amongst us today. Thank you for the participants for being here. Over to you, Dr. Shivani. Dr. Shivani, you're not audible. I think your microphone is on mute.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Before inviting our respected principal, Dr. Neerja Singh ma'am, I would like to give brief introduction about her. Ma'am is an appropriate example of good administrator and a humble personality. She has always been extremely supportive and positive to the new thoughts. For us, she is just like a mother figure who guides us the right path. Now, I request the head of our family, respected principal ma'am, to please give the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shivani. नमस्कार, आप सभी का स्वागत है. I, Dr. Neerja Singh, Principal, National PG College, Lucknow, India, welcome all of you in the webinar entitled "A Crisis for Sustainability with a Question Mark." On behalf of National PG College family, management, faculty members, staff, and students, I welcome Professor David Crowther, Professor CSR, Montfort University, Derby, Professor V.K. Singh, Head and Dean, FMS Gurukul Kangari University, Haridwar, Dr. Nikhil Kumarji from University Grant Commission, and all the distinguished participants. Participants from 14 countries across the globe, participants from more than 58 colleges, universities, organizations across the world, Dr. Rakesh Jain, Technical Coordinator, Dr. Diksha, Dr. Shivani, Dr. Priyanshi, and all the faculty members and the students. A crisis for sustainability. The topic of today's webinar is very relevant in the present scenario. The World Summit on Sustainable Development held in 2002 affirmed international conventions linking, I quote, environmental degradation, poverty reduction, indigenous rights, and access to education, health services, and employment. And nowadays, we are going through a tough time as COVID-19 poses a threat to human survival. In these tough conditions, we, the human beings, have to adapt ourselves to survive and to sustain. Being educationists, we are also adopting new technologies and pedagogies for our academic and intellectual sustainability. I am sure with patience and positivity, we will win soon. The human being will win soon. I will not take much time and pray the Almighty through a mantra for welfare of all of us, for welfare of humanity. Om. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukh bhag bhave. Om. Be safe, be healthy, because safety pays always. Namaskar, Jai Hind. Over to Shivani. Thank you, Shivani.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a warm welcome. Now, moving further, nature has enough for men's need, but not enough for men's greed. This quote actually describes the relevance for sustainability. And now, I have a pleasure to introduce Professor V.K. Singh to give the opening remark. Before I invite him, I would like to apprise few facts about him. Professor Singh is presently the head and dean at Faculty of Management Studies, Gurukul Kangri, Vishwavidyalaya, Haridwar, Uttarakhand. Professor Singh has extensively traveled across 14 nations, including UK, USA, Germany, etc., serving academic purpose. He has been a visiting faculty to Oman, Slovakia, Abu Dhabi, and IIT Roorkee. He has written more than 60 research papers and authored around 15 books. He has guided 22 doctoral scholars. And no doubt, he is a renowned name in the field of management education. I welcome Professor Singh for the opening remark. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I welcome all the people, those who are behind this grand occasion. And in fact, I don't find to mention especially one occasion of my days in South Africa with David COVID. And this is the second time we are meeting each other. First time we have met and we had a very good days. I remember when I was in South Africa, Cape Town. So thank you once again, Professor David. It was nice meeting virtually to you. Can you tell me, please, how much time I have to be allotted for so that I can plan accordingly?
So you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Diksha. So when you talk of a crisis of sustainability, I remember a quote of Robert Swan. What he says is the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. This is a very, you can say, thing which is really cemented when we talk of sustainability. Well, when you say sustainability, what actually we mean of focusing on meeting the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Factually, the concept of sustainability is composed of three pillars. What we can say is the economic, the environmental, and the social, which is also known to be the three P's in terms of looking to the profits, planet, and people. Well, when you say sustainability, what it really means is to encourage the businesses to frame decisions in terms of environmental, social, and human impact for the long term rather than on the short term gains. John Illington, who has authored the book called Cannibals with the Fox and co-founder of the sustainability consultancy firm Sustainability, was one of the first people to integrate these three principles. He argues that companies needed to start considering this triple line, which really means to look for thrive in the long run, especially when you talk of looking to the cementing factor. Originally, sustainability means making only such use of natural, renewable resources that people can continue to rely on their yields in the long term. Moving towards sustainability is also a social challenges that entails international and national law, looking to the urban planning and transport, supply chain management, local and individual lifestyles, and ethical consumerism. So overall, when you look onto the entire focuses, you say that these are the ways of living more sustainability can take more forms in terms of reorganizing living conditions, such as eco villages are there, eco municipalities are there. Then you talk of sustainable cities, which is of more of in the use. Then reappearing economic sectors that normally look in terms of permaculture. Then you say green buildings or sustainable agricultures, or in other words, you say the workplaces that is more of sustainable architecture. So using such a science to develop a new technologies, well, although can be framed in terms of green technologies, renewable energy, and sustainable, what you can say, the fusion and the fusion power, what is really to be looked upon. Now, when you say, looking to the designing system in terms of flexible and reversible manner, it is more of adjusting individuals' lifestyle that conserve the natural resources. The concepts of sustainability development can be interpreted in many different ways, but as it is a core is in an approach to development that looks to balance differences in terms of competing needs against the awareness of environment, social and economical limitations, which we feel, in fact, look to the fact that sustainable development provides an approaches to making better decisions on the on the issues that affects all of our lives. By incorporating health plans into the planning of a new communities, for instance, we can ensure that residents have easy access to healthcare and leisure facilities. Sustainable development has been defined in many ways, but as a matter of fact, if you look onto the most frequent quote, which is defined in our common future, also known as Brundtland Report. So what they say is something like sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of our present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. When you look onto the system development, what is more to be required is to say about the sustainable if it does not destroy resources, for its development, and the system is able to function in harmony with the large systems as the part of a long run. What is to be more looked upon is that the society of the environmental level means that we need to take proper care of our waste, reasonable use and reuse of other natural resources. In terms of sustainability on a social economical level means that we need to take care of proper functioning of social economic structure in organizational or businesses by making them more into the harmony. Well, people talks about looking to the sustainability as the personal level means here we try to develop a balanced, healthy consciousness which is able to function in terms of harmony, and other people talk whether it is a society or an environment as a whole. Now, when we talk of the crisis, what is we to look upon is that a crisis of sustainability is the collective effort of environmental changes which humanity cannot live in the long term. This includes ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, and mass extinction in terms of ecosystem and land degradation. Well, when we talk of other factors like drought and desertification, crisis of water supply and sanitation, pollution of land, sea, and air by the wide range of persistence and destructive toxins and climate changes, all have a proven to be a large-scale, long-term pervasive resistance to piecemeal, easy or cheap solutions, and in many cases, mutually, we talk of interacting and reinforcing what actually we talk of. Now, they can be combined with the human-caused problems such as overfishing, overpopulation, and war to undermine the living conditions, livelihood, health, and well-being of everyone on the earth, but particularly those of weaker human stakeholders such as the poor. When you look into the context of crisis, which is inevitable, open to the doors for rethinking development, we need to understand the recognition of climate change that has increased solution associated with the green economy, environmental regulations, and merits eco-social grassroots that alternatively have gained tractions. Well, each of the different pathway to develop raise questions vis-a-vis to the challenge of sustainability. Now, this is the apparent both in terms of relationship or in terms of economic, social, and environmental emancipatory dimensions of development and normative aspects associated with the well-being and right, which we talk in terms of people and planet both, and intra and intergeneration equity. Each pathway is characterized by certain bases, blind support or so-called elephant in the syndrome. Now, when you look into certain facts and figures, now what is the elephant in the room syndrome? When we say the term which refers to the question, problem, solution, or controversy issues, which is obvious to everyone who knows about the situation, but which is deliberately ignored because to do otherwise would cause a great embarrassment, sadness, and arguments, or the simple taboo what we look upon. The item can imply a value judgmental that has issue ought to be discussed openly, or it can simply be acknowledgement that is the issue where we cannot go on the way by itself. The rationale behind the item is that an elephant in a living room would be impossible to overlook, but people in the room can nevertheless choose to behave as if the elephant was non-existent. Dear, when we look into the other aspect of crisis sustainability, we look on to or to understand how to connect to the sustainability crisis. So in this particular way, we need to understand almost everyone is aware about sustainability situation, but how we are acting upon it is a matter of fact when more important decisions for social actors is to be proceeded for. The way we approach development affect everyone. The impacts of our decisions as a society have a real consequence for people who are living. We all have a part to play, friends, but What is fact is small actions taken collectively can add up to the real changes. Living within our environmental limit is one of the central principles of sustainable development. One implications of not doing so climate change, but the focus of sustainable development is far broader than just an environment what we are looking for. It's a local reality that strong, healthy, and social justifications need to mean meeting the diverse need of all people in existing and future communities, promoting personal well-being, social cohesiveness, and inclusion of creating equal opportunity. Well, looking to the fact that sustainability and COVID outbreak, what we can do is during these certain times, we can forget about the climate crisis. We will connect sustainable with the current coronavirus outbreak. What can we do to sustainable during this crisis? We have certain things to understand. The use of electronic devices growing every day. Nevertheless, these devices are made of earth mineral existence by the mining industry. Mining can be a very polluting industry in the development of new sites, certainly has an impact on deforestation. Therefore, being sustainable in the tech field also a lot to do with using your devices for a long despite having new ones comes out all the time. It is also to be ensure that you get a dispose of this in responsible way as can be very polluting if not handled properly as a whole. Friends, when you look onto certain fact and figures in terms of fashion, eventually fast fashion focuses on speed and low cost to deliver frequent new collections. Look onto the zero waste movement in the lifestyle and encourage people to use all types of resources in the circular way. Then linked with the lifestyle is also a minimal way of living where people are often invited to leave behind and refuse that don't need as such. The movement is also very well known by people taking their own bulks to shop to buy commodities such as chickpeas, rice, or liquid soap. The goal is clear, not to take any trash home. We also talk in terms of a company that tries to grow its crops by not using toxic pesticides and focuses on organic framing and biomimicking practices in certainly a less polluting one. If it pays fair wages to employees and managers to still be competitive to the market, believe me, it is then responsible when it's come to the profit to the people and to the planet as a whole. And the last point which I would like to come up and associate with the COVID is some cities across different countries already have started creating lists that has a small and local owners who are available to deliver at request. Despite the absence of websites which you can choose the product, you buy a phone, you can connect your own owners. So that is what we talk in terms of other views. Last but not least, we can regenerate because time is getting short. We are living in this planet if we had another one to look for. That is what Terry Switzer talks about, the nurse and winner of Goldman Environmental Prize in 1997. I would refer some of the books, which is very close to my heart, Designing Regenerative Culture by Daniel Christian Well. Another thing is about biomimicking, which is an innovative in spite of nature by Janine Bunyos, which is also close to my heart. The third is Cradle to Cradle, remaking the way we make things by William MacDonald and Magnol Bugot, and Simple Matters by Irene Boyle, and last, The Life-Changing Magic by Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. We can understand with a lot of movies also, and some of the movies which I have really very recently, and which is again, which can be linked to such a type of crisis and sustainability is The Wall-E, Avatar, and The Inconvenience Truth. So with this, I thanks for my opening remark, and I once again welcome the organizers for looking to such a burning topic. I thank you, Diksha, thank you, organizers, thank you everyone for the very patient hearing. And now the soft board is for David Cawthron. Thank you very much.
Thank you for gracing the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir rightly emphasized on the topic sustainability in a very simple way. Moving towards eco culture should be a part of our life. Sustainable development is meeting the needs of present without compromising the future needs. Sir has also correlated sustainable development with the present pandemic era in a very easy and effective way. Thank you so much, sir. Now, let us all move towards our most awaited keynote address. It's an honor and privilege to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor David Crowther. But before giving the session to him, I just want to brief something about him. Professor Crowther is a professor of corporate social responsibility and University of Bedfordshire, UK, London School of Commerce, UK, and State University, Malaysia. He is an expert in various fields. He is a specialist in business administration, a game theoretician, a psychologist, while also a qualified accountant who has worked as accountant, system specialist, and general management in local government, industry, and commerce for over 20 years. After a number of years in the financial services sector, he decided to leave the business world and become an academic. In 1994, he joined Aston University and there obtained a PhD in 1999 for research into corporate social performance. In 2001, he became the first professor of corporate social responsibility in the world. He gives advice as Chief Research Fellow at Lithuanian Institute of Agrarian Economics and has consulted extensively around the world. At Stanford University, he is also a member of the board and president of the Sustainability Research Institute. He has consulted widely, including US presidential candidates. Professor David has published more than 60 books and has also contributed several hundred articles to academic, business, and professional journals and to edited book collections. He has also spoken widely at conferences and seminars worldwide and acted as a consultant to a wide range of government, professional, and commercial organizations. In 2002, he established the Social Responsibility Research Network, an international body which now has over 1,000 members together with associated international conference series, journals, and book series. In 2010, he established the organization Governance Network and Conference Series. He is listed in Who's Who in the world and various other directories. His research is into sustainability, governance, and corporate social responsibility, with a particular emphasis on the relationship between social, environmental, and financial performance. His latest project is to edit and produce the Palgrave Major Reference Work on Corporate Social Responsibility. Now, I would like to request Professor Crowther to please enlighten us with your session. Over to you, Professor Crowther.
I request all the participants, when the presentation begins, please pin on to Professor Crowther's presentation so you can have uninterrupted view. Professor Kauta, you're not audible to us, sir. Please switch on the microphone so that we can hear you also. Professor Kauta, please unmute your microphone. We cannot hear you. Your microphone is not still muted. Dr. Priyanshi, can you try and unmute Professor Kauta? Let's see if we can unmute him from our end.
Just a second, ma'am. I'm seeing.
I lost it now, haven't
Maybe you should use that one.
I? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. You're audible now, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay.
Yes, Professor David, now it is audible.
Apologies for that. Technology might not be my strongest point here. I'd like to start by saying good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And I'd like to thank the university for inviting me to express some opinions rather than provide answers. I deliberately title my talk as a question, a crisis for sustainability, but really there are two questions. One, is there a crisis for sustainability? And two, if there is, what are we going to do about it? Because if there is a crisis, we do need to do something about it. So I'll express some opinions, give you some comments and such like, and let's see where we get to at the end. So I always like to start off a presentation with some good news, and there's always some good news to tell. So let's see what good news we've got at the moment. Right. So the first good news is, due to the coronavirus pandemic, Earth Overshoot Day has changed. Last year it happened on the 29th of July. This year it will happen on the 22nd of August, which is about 26 days earlier than what would have happened if there hadn't been a pandemic. If you don't know what Earth Overshoot Day is, it is the day when all the natural resources that the Earth is able to regenerate during the year have been used in that year. So from the 23rd of August, we're running in overdraft, we're extinguishing resources that cannot be regenerated. But the good news is it's a lot better than it was last year. More good news. Here's a map of Europe, and you can see between the top and the bottom how much less pollution is being generated because people don't travel as much, because people don't use industry so much less activity. It's quite noticeable here. I choose Europe, where you can see for France and Italy and Spain, the reduction is around about 50%. It's equally noticeable in countries like China, less so in some other countries, which I'll come to in a minute. And this is a typical scene now from this one's from within Europe. Much less traffic, allowing vegetation to flourish much better, that kind of thing. So it's all promising, and I'm sure you recognise this. This is the before and after for for Delhi there, they can see the reduction in pollution has made a much cleaner environment, which is much better for breathing and much healthier. And these are all effects that have come from the pandemic, which we are being exposed to at the moment. The downside, of course, is the extra precautions that need to be taken, the number of people who have died, and those kinds of consequences. So the news is not all good. The good news comes alongside bad news, as always. So let's look a bit more what's happening in different parts of the world where we've had lockdown. And you can see here in Paris, CO2 emissions reduced by 72% as a result of lockdown. In New York, they're reduced by 10% only. So the response around the world has been different. The effects around the world have been different. You can equally say the number of infections and the number of deaths in different parts of the world have been different depending on responses. Of course, in some parts of the world, the virus is still spreading, whereas other parts, such as Europe, generally are recovering more than they were before. But the question is, this is what's happened as a result of lockdown. What's going to happen when that lockdown finishes, when we seek to go back to normal? Do we go back to the situation we had before, or is something going to happen? Something we want to talk about. Here's another graph of what's happened to the airline industry, where the number of people flying has reduced by 3/4 over 3 months. Again, that has a significant impact upon the environment, significant impact upon pollution, and consequently a significant impact upon our health. But equally, it has a significant impact upon the economic well-being of people. We cannot look at the benefits without considering the problems also. And if we're going to recognize whether we've got a crisis or not, we've got to look at all aspects. And here's another graph which shows that the amount of traffic in all these cities has reduced quite dramatically as a result of the pandemic, although it's starting to recover. Shanghai, for example, which is much more advanced in the course of the pandemic, you can see that the traffic levels are recovering much more to what they were before it happened. So that's the good news. The amount of pollution has dropped dramatically. The Earth is recovering to some extent because Earth Overshoot Day has been delayed by very nearly a month. But let's look now at the real news, not the good news. So let's start by putting things into perspective. As far as coronavirus is concerned, currently about 600,000 people around the world have died, and it's projected that it will result in the deaths of between 1 or 2 million people. Compare that with something that nobody ever talks about, either before the pandemic or since, really, which is the number of people who died from the effects of climate change. Currently, the number of people dying from climate change is around about 250,000 a year, which means that so far 2.5 million people have died. The rate of death is increasing, and the projection, nobody will give a projection because nobody knows how seriously it will impact people in the future. But what we can say is the number of deaths from climate change far outweighs the number of deaths from coronavirus, and we need to put these things into perspective and react appropriately. So, what else do we want to say about people? You can see here how the population of the world has increased, and at the same time, life expectancy of everybody has increased. So we've got more people in the world. Each person can expect to live longer, which increases the population as well. But this, of course, affects the amount of resources that are consumed. So we need to bear that in mind also while we're thinking about whether there's a crisis or not. Having said that about projections of world population, a couple of weeks ago in The Lancet, which is one of the major medical journals published, there was a long, interesting article which forecast that the number of people in the world would not carry on increasing, but would actually reduce by the end of this century. So they said that at the moment, well, in 2017, which is when they had the figures, there were 7.6 billion people in the world. By the end of the century, this will reduce to 6.2 billion people. But before it reduces, it will carry on increasing and will hit a peak of 9.7 billion. I've shown the figures there for India in comparison. Some of the other countries in the world, such as Spain or Japan, they're far more significant because the forecast is that the population in those countries will halve between now and the end of the century. So according to these forecasts, which are very reliable, the research is thorough, as it wouldn't have been published, we can expect a significant reduction in population, but before that happens, there'll be a significant rise in population that we need to accommodate. So again, that has an impact upon sustainability, long-term and medium-term. The significance of these are quite different. And again, when we're considering whether there's a crisis, we need to consider, is there a crisis now? Will there be a crisis in the near future? Will there be a crisis in the far future? The other thing, though, this forecast means is what's going to happen as this century progresses. There's going to be more and more people, more and more old people relative to young people. So by the middle of the century, the number of people over 65 in the world will outnumber the number of people of working age. That too has implications for health. It has implications for economic activity. It has implications in terms of distribution of resources in the world. Then these are all things I'll come back to in a few minutes. So let's go back to where I started with the Earth Overshoot Day. You can see here how over the last few years, Earth Overshoot Day has got earlier and earlier each year. In other words, we're overusing the resources of the planet to a greater extent each year, until this year, when things have been reversed due to the effects of the pandemic. So is that good news? I'll answer that in a minute. Let's look at Earth Overshoot Day if we apply it to individual countries. If we apply it to the USA, by the middle of March, they're using more resources than are created within the country. If we look at the UK, my country, it's the middle of May when that happens. If we look at India, well, it never happens. The resources of the country extend beyond what is used by the country at the moment. If we look at some of the Arab countries, the Earth Overshoot Day happens in the middle of January. So they are overusing their resources, the available resources, 24 times in a year. Quite significant. And that these sort of figures raise serious questions about sustainability of life as it carries on at the moment. And here I'm showing how the CO2 emissions have increased over the last 100 years. Over the last 100 years, they've increased about 10 to 12 times. They've reduced in the current year because of the pandemic, but the reduction is just that little amount there. So it's been estimated that the results of the pandemic will cause a 5% reduction in CO2 in the world. And we think that's good news. Everybody's talking about it as if it's good news. But if we're going to meet the agreements we had, which was to achieve a goal of 1.5 degrees limit to temperature increase, we've got to have a reduction of 7.6% every year from now onwards. So the effects of the pandemic has reduced economic activity, but even that significant reduction in economic activity is not sufficient to enable us to meet our goal of limiting temperature increase. So we start off by saying the pandemic has some good news because of its effect upon the environment. Yes, it's true, but it's not good enough. We're not making any difference to climate change, not any significant difference to climate change because of what's happened. So cutting out the economic activity that we have cut out does not enable us to meet our climate change, our temperature increase goals. So how sustainable is the world as it is at the moment? Well, let's move on a bit. If we want to keep our temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, we've got to reduce our emissions of CO2, etc., significantly, and we've got to move into not a reduced increase. We've got to actually move into an era of negative CO2 emissions. That's a major problem given our infrastructure, given our lifestyle, given our economic activity. How are we going to achieve that? So let's consider the situation and where we are. The introduction talked about the equal pillars of sustainability, the economic, environmental, and social. What everybody talks about these being essential to sustainable development. Everybody says, because Brundtland said so, these have to be 3 equal pillars. Plainly, they're not equal, and nobody treats them as equal, because all we ever do is focus upon the economic or the environmental or the social. We don't focus on a balance, and nobody ever focuses on the 4th pillar, the one that I've added, which is equity. If we're going to achieve sustainability, we've got to achieve some kind of equity in terms of the lifestyle, lifeability of people around the world. If we don't manage to consider equity alongside the others, we are never going to achieve sustainability. So the world, as I'm sure we all know, that the world is very unequal at the moment. We talk about things like poverty alleviation. We talk about developing parts of the world. What we don't talk about really is the things that matter. One is access to resources, adequate access to all the resources. This is a major problem for some people. For example, water, access to water is a major problem for some people in some parts of the world, although in other parts of the world, too much water is a problem as sea rise removes the land that they're living on. Equally, other resources, the introductory speaker talked about technology and the use of rare earth metals. They're not equally distributed, and ability to have those creates global inequality. It creates global inequality because of where they're located and because of how people can acquire them. In other words, the rich can acquire the resources they need by paying. The poor can't acquire them even though they need them. I'll come back to that. We're unequal in terms of access to health. The health of different parts of the world is very different. I talked earlier about the life expectancy of people generally rising over time, but that's not true in every country, and it's not true of particular groups of people within many countries. Even my own country, the UK, which people think is a very equal country, access to health is very unequal between the rich and the poor. It's very unequal in different regions, and it's the same everywhere. And then if you look at the world generally, it's like that, only more so. One consequence of this is life expectancy is different in different parts of the world or amongst different groups of people in the same part of the world. And the consequence of all of these inequalities is conflict, or it is a potential for conflict, because people don't perceive their share of the planet to be equitable. And if we don't have equity, we have conflict. And if we have conflict, we don't have sustainability. So let's have a look at some figures. Never mind about rare earth metals. Let's consider some of the more important metals and how long they're going to last. These are the latest figures I could find, which say that if you were born in 2010, how much is left. This is how much is left in the planet to be used before we run out. And we can see the forecast about oil running out in 2050, although with the pandemic that might change. We don't really know. We can look at some of the metals that we need to use. Metals, the only problem with rare earth metals is where they're located and who has access to them because of that. Look at some of the more common metals. Look at copper. Copper is going to run out in, depending on the forecast, given the rate of production is changing. The bottom part of each line shows what will happen. Copper will run out within 20 years. There'll be no more copper in the world to be used because it will all have been extracted. It will all have been used. Now that's a serious problem. We need copper for many things. We need copper's our basis for conducting electricity, that kind of thing. So it's quite significant. But copper is even more significant because it's a trace mineral. In other words, we need copper to live. All of us need copper to live. So if we run out of copper, what are the implications of that? Now, if you start doing research on these kind of things, or when minerals are going to run out, it's quite interesting because you can find these forecasts that we're going to run out within the lifetime of almost everybody in this webinar. We're going to run out of things like copper. We're going to run out of things like oil. But these figures are disputed. No government accepts these figures. They all say, we don't think there's a problem. These figures are wrong. And if governments don't recognise these figures, they don't plan for a future taking this into account. So we need to change. So we present realistic figures, present realistic projections, and plan accordingly. And okay, it's not going to happen in the next 10 years, but it's definitely going to happen within the next 20 years. And something needs to be done because it will be a major problem. And you can go through mineral after mineral, and the figures are similar. Many will run out certainly within the lifetime of most of the people in this webinar. Probably not within my lifetime because I'm getting pretty old now, but for most people, this is a problem. It's a problem that needs to be recognised now, and action needs to be taken now. We can't start talking about sustainability unless we recognise what the problems are. So it's all right talking about sustainable development means we've got to take into account the economic, the environmental and the social. We've got to take into account reality. We've got to take into account what the actual situation is and plan accordingly. And clearly nobody is doing so at the moment. So this is what we see at the moment. This is an oil field in the USA, but at this particular time it's silent because this photo was taken during the early days of the pandemic, when the oil demanded in the world was far less than the production capacity. So many oil fields went out of business. But just look at that and how it represents economic activity, but think also how it affects environmental activity, the environmental impact, and think about how it affects the social impact. As I've said, and I say many times, we cannot think of any of these in isolation. We've got to think of all of them and address all of them appropriately. Let's think about something that has been raised as a result of the pandemic, and that is the future of cities. How are cities going to cope in the future? In fact, some people have said basically cities have no future. People cannot live sustainably in large collections like they do at the moment. Some of these large cities that exist in the world can never be sustainable because of the situation. So we need to do something about it. It's all right saying that, but at the same time, we've got to recognise that people have lived in cities ever since people joined together. The oldest cities in the world are more than years old. So people want to live in cities, people want to specialise, such like, and so we need to plan to make cities sustainable. We don't want to say there's no future for cities, but we equally don't want to say cities can go on unchanged and continue to grow, and we'll import all the food that's needed, we'll import all the power that's needed from elsewhere, because that involves a larger and larger area feeding, powering just one location. So we want to think about what can be done to make cities more sustainable, and more sustainable means access to food produce, how we deal with transport, and how we deal with energy efficiency. So if you think about access to food store resources, there are developments taking place to enable food to be grown within cities, such things as vertical farming, warehouses being used to grow produce that we can eat that can be distributed locally. I think one of the results of the pandemic is that we need to recognize that treating the world as a whole, and we can draw upon food resources from anywhere in the world that we need to and move it around the world accordingly, is not a viable option for the future. It's not a viable option at the present for many people. It works fine for the rich people, for the rich countries, less so for other countries. Again, another source of inequality. So there are things happening that need to be encouraged and generated more and applied to more parts of the world. Transport. We've got to recognise that the future of motor vehicles is limited. It has no future. We cannot accommodate motor vehicles within a sustainable future because of the pollution caused by it. So we need to think about it. We need to develop alternative transport methods. In fact, in this country, just recently, the government has recognised that obesity is a problem, recognised that if you're obese, your chances of becoming seriously ill and dying from coronavirus are greatly increased. So they're trying to do something about that, and they're recommending cycles as a means of transport. Now, cycles work okay within many cities, and if you go to cities in China, for example, there's millions of cycles around. If you go to cities in Holland, everybody cycles, but that's just one answer. There's many possible answers to dealing with transport, but it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed not as a global answer, but in the context of every single city developing what's needed for that city accordingly, but focusing upon sustainability and not pollution and not energy consumption. Which brings me on to the third one of those, which is energy efficiency. Much of what happens at the moment is extremely energy inefficient. And if you travel around the world, as I do, you notice what sort of how energy is being produced and used in different countries, and it's used very inefficiently everywhere. For example, I go to a hot country, a country which has plenty of sunshine, and I don't see solar energy being utilised to any great extent. Whereas in my country, Britain, which is hardly the sunniest country in the world, lots and lots of people, increasing numbers of people, are making use of solar energy. That's one possibility. There are other possibilities of energy production which are renewable, that can be used, that are not being used. What we've got to recognise is if we're going to live in society, we need some kind of energy to enable us to function, to enable society to function. We need to be efficient in its use, efficient in its production, and efficient in the utilization of the resources we need to produce and distribute it. Bearing in mind what I said about running out of copper, distributing electricity is going to become a problem in the future if we got no copper. So what do we do about it? And of course, in terms of thinking of the future of cities, it seems clear that local production of any of these is preferable to large scale operations which have to be where the energy produced has to be transported around the world. In other words, we're looking to a future in which there's more focus on local than there is upon global in terms of managing resources. That, of course, also raises a number of questions. I'll give you an example. A year ago, an event like this would have taken place by us all gathering together and talking about these issues. But now there are people from all around the world participating in this event and working, it's working quite satisfactorily. There are always alternatives if we choose to think of alternatives. Alternatives are not necessarily developments of what's happening. Many significant developments can be radical changes from what's happening. Again, something I'll come back to. So that brings me to the question, is there a crisis for sustainability? Yes, there is. Clearly, we don't live in a sustainable world. Clearly, the lifestyle of most people on the planet is not sustainable. And clearly, the fact that people are talking about sustainability, and in this country, people say we're progressing towards sustainability. We're taking steps towards sustainability, like this is good. And this annoys me because you can't take steps towards sustainability. So that means I'm taking a step towards sustainability. That means I'm less sustainable than I was, but I'm still unsustainable. Sustainability is absolute, and we need to recognize what's needed to create absolute sustainability before we can address how we arrive at that. And at the moment, we plan the wrong way round. We look at what's happening now, how we can change a little bit to become more sustainable. We don't start with a clean drawing sheet and say, this is what a sustainable world would look like. This is how we can progress towards that. So, as far as I'm concerned, yes, there is a need for sustainability. I mean, there is a crisis in sustainability. There's a need for change. There's an impetus for change. All the speakers so far have talked about sustainability and the need for change, and people are assuming that the pandemic creates an environment in which that change can happen. But if we start in the wrong place, we never get to the right place. We talk about the equal pillars of sustainable development, and we define sustainability as not affecting decisions we take in the present do not affect the ability of people in the future to make decisions, and people just accept that. As far as I'm concerned, that's nonsense. Every decision we take in the present, of course it affects the future. It doesn't necessarily limit the choices of people in the future, but it makes different choices available to them. So we are changing the future by what we do in the present, no matter how sustainable we are. So we need to start by recognizing what sustainability looks like before we talk about how we arrive at sustainability. We cannot plan change unless we know where we want to get to. We can't have change by moving from where we are. We have to have change by moving towards something. So that leads me to my second question. What are we going to do about it? Right, as far as I'm concerned, what we're not going to do about it is rely upon our political leaders, because plainly they are leading us in the wrong direction. What we're not going to do is rely upon our old people, because they're experts. People of my age are seen as experts. People of my generation created this mess. How can we be experts on how to get out of this mess? Change doesn't come from incremental change, a little bit here, a little bit there. It comes from people thinking radically, developing alternatives, and then working to get those implemented. Now, sustainability won't happen by relying on other people to do it for us, as one of the speakers has already said. We cannot rely on other people to create change. We've got to do it ourselves. But the people who've got to do it are the people who are going to be impacted more by the future, which is not people of my age, but young people. If we look at how change happens in the world, in the majority of cases, it happens from younger people thinking radically and doing something radically different. That's what we need this time. In other words, the future belongs to you, but getting a sustainable future is down to you to create it, not to rely on anybody else. Thank you. So, if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Crowther, for such an enlightening session. Sir has focused on significant impact of economic well-being and the environment, and he has too emphasized on the climate change, equal pillars of sustainability, and the earth overshooting. He interestingly explained, born in 2010, how much is left for us and the future of the city. Now, I request Ms. Priyanshi to initiate the question and answer sessions. Over to you, Ms. Priyanshi.
Thank you, Dr. Shivani. Since the theme of the webinar is vital and the discussion on it is the need of the hour, it's natural that we have few questions, but due to paucity of time, I'm taking a few of them. So I request Riddhi Pandey, a student of National PG College, to kindly unmute herself and ask the question.
Hello everyone. So my question to you is that how does the investor or the bankers can contribute to get over from the crisis in the sustainable development goals?
I'd like to request Professor Crowther to please elucidate his views.
Can you please repeat the question again for Professor Crowther?
I'm sorry, I missed that question. I lost connection.
Just another problem. Could you please repeat the question again?
Yes, ma'am. How does the investors or the bankers can contribute to get over from the crisis in the sustainable development goals?
Why are we relying on bankers or people like that to get over the crisis? the way we get over that crisis is for us as people to decide what needs to be done and tell the bankers. Part of my message is don't shift responsibility away from yourself. We've all got to do something, not rely on somebody else.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's a question by Prem Sikka. Whatever counts as resource has varied throughout human history. 200 years ago, oil was not considered to be a vital resource. 50 years ago, silicon or sand was not considered to be a resource, but is now vital for the microchip industry. The biggest barrier to SDG is human intoxication with the accumulation of private wealth, status, and power. That is, there are cultural fault lines. What can be done?
Of course, there are cultural differences, and of course, things have changed over time. and of course, what was considered resources at one time was not what wasn't considered a resource is now considered a resource. So where I live, for example, people are reworking old minings to extract minerals that were not wanted before. But the point is not to answer those questions. The point is to say, what future do we want, and how do we get to that future? So if we start by talking about how we can adjust the present, we're never going to arrive there. That's basically what my message is.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I would like to request Shreya Singh, a student of National PG College, to kindly unmute herself and ask the question. Shreya, do we have you?
Yes, ma'am. Hello, sir. A warm greeting to you. So, on behalf of a National PG College student, I'm going to ask you a question. How can we avoid a development finance collapse that would send millions back into poverty and compromise our strategy to reach the special development goals?
That's a good question, but it would take a lot longer than a minute to answer it, really, wouldn't it? It's a complex question, the way development finance arrives and how it's utilized and such like, and what needs to be done about it. But the simple answer is to say, if we all start by saying what's needed, then we can start supplying what's needed. In other words, it comes back to the same thing. What do we want a sustainable future to look like, and how do we get there? Not how can we adjust the present, but how can we get to a future that we want? But we never have that conversation, so it's not going to happen.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. There's another question from Lukman Rani. In the face of heavily polluted planet, how best should the business community balance the dimensions of sustainability?
The answer to that is simple, isn't it? Equity. If people are happy with how things are, there's no need to change it. If they're not happy, it needs to be changed so people are happy. If we don't have equity, then we can't balance anything. If we don't have equity so that people are satisfied, then we have something imposed by somebody else. In other words, we leave it to more powerful people to do it for us. I'm not happy with that, and I hope none of you are either.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to open the platform to all the participants. They can kindly unmute themselves and ask if they have any questions.
Okay, let me jump in immediately with a question, and the picture is here. Regards from, You can't see me, can you? No.
We can see you now, ma'am.
You can see me now. Fine. Regards from Croatia. I had this question about this deep adaptation by Jem Bendel, and I really want the professor to tell us what he thinks about it. I guess some of you, or maybe many, are familiar with what that is. It's a paper on how to adapt to the situation that the overall collapse, environmental/social, is very likely, if not inevitable, in the nearer future than we would have thought at the beginning. Basically, that's it. Yes, Professor, I'm muting myself now.
I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are you asking me if I agree with that? And if so, then yes, you're right. If we don't do anything, that's what's going to happen. If we don't want that to happen, we have to do something about it. So what do we do about it? What future do we want? Do we want a future where civilization collapses? I guess very few people want that. So we have to do something. And again, it's not about social and environmental situation. It's what kind of sustainable, what side of the future do we want that is sustainable, and how do we get there? But unless we address that question, none of the others have much meaning, do they, really? And the other thing I'd like to say to everybody is, I'm not the expert. I don't have all the answers. If you think I've got all the answers, make me the world leader and I'll solve all the problems. But I haven't got the answers. But what I have got that most people don't seem to have is the questions. If we start with the right questions and answer those, we can arrive at the right answers. But the answers don't come from me. The answers come from all of us.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Professor David. I have a question for you.
Yes, Mr. Andrew, you can go ahead and ask the question.
How can we control and minimize the current huge waste of food production at the local and global scale? How can we control and minimize the current huge waste management of food production at local and global scale?
Well, yes, that's an important question, but it's also a complex question, isn't it? Because the situation has been set up so that we have large corporations acquiring food, and we have rich people in countries such as mine that can decide whether they want this particular vegetable or this one because they're a better shape, and throwing the others away. So that's, and then well, I'm not sure what I want to eat, so I'll buy enough meals for a week and only use them for 2 days and throw the rest away. That's all cultural, and it's all cultural understanding of what is important. So the only way we're going to change that is not by changing the system, but by changing people's behavior and people's expectations. When I was a child here in this country, we ate whatever food was in season, produced locally, because that was what was available. Now, if I want food, I can go to and buy anything that's produced anywhere in the world. That's not sustainable, but that's one of the things I said about creating sustainable cities. We've got to create them based upon local food supplies rather than global food supplies. So it means changing a whole industry, changing people's expectations, and focusing upon doing what's sustainable rather than saying, here's a lot of choice, demonstrate your affluence by wasting it. And that's the society we live in at the moment. So that's a major change. But the change has got to start from people and their expectations, not from regulating the industry.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to. Sorry.
I have one more question. Yeah, Professor David, I have one more question to you. How do we keep and enhance positive sustainability impacts which long-term in post-pandemic world? I'll repeat it.
Sorry,
again.
could you repeat that?
How we keep ourselves to enhance the positive sustainability which impact long-term after post-pandemic world?
Well, we've got. I think everybody will recognise and agree with me that we don't have a sustainable. We don't have a sustainable present. This present is not sustainable. The changes that have been created by the pandemic are not enough to make a future sustainable. So we're nowhere near a sustainable future. So again, it's the same answer again, isn't it? We decide what kind of sustainable future we want and how we get there. We can't say the pandemic's got us part way there, because part way there is still not sustainable. So we've got to do something different. We can't say go back to how we were, that's not sustainable. We can't say stay how we are now, that's not sustainable. We've got to do something radically different.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Sir Jeevan Kumar Chaudhary to please put his question.
Doctor.
From two devices.
I believe you.
I think he's logged in from two devices. If there are any other questions, I think we can only take one more question because it's already 3 p.m. and the time was for till 3 p.m. We can, I think, entertain one last question if anybody has. Or going. Any last questions? Yes.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Please unmute. Yes, sir. Prem Sikka, sir. Please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay. Hi, David.
Hi.
There's some.
Says microphone is still on.
Okay. Yes, sir. Please continue.
Hi, David. Lovely to see you. And it's the best investment of an hour I made so far this year. My sort of question is, it is hard to imagine that we can have a sustainable world with rampant capitalism. Two just don't really go together. So the issue then becomes is, what kind of a revolution of human consciousness are we to aim at simply in order to survive?
Yeah, so that's a big question, isn't it, Prem?
I only ask big questions, David.
The only change that is sustainable is change to something we want, we collectively want. And if we all say somebody else can decide for us, we get capitalism, we get the situation we've got. So if we say that's not satisfactory, we've then to say our responsibility is to create something that we do want. But that something we do want is not what I want. Oh, it'd be nice if it was. It's not what Prem wants. It's not what anybody else here wants. It's what we collectively want. That's the only way to arrive at sustainability and to arrive at some kind of organization that achieves that.
Can I follow it up?
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. David, I mean, one of the sort of possibilities that I think is what we all need is de-schooling. Forget all that we learned at colleges and universities for in business schools, because business schools are actually a big problem in all of this that teach people that the objective of the firm is to maximize the value of the firm, and accounting is all about maximizing something for shareholders. None of these things can be reconciled with any sense of human survival. And all it encourages is plundering of the planet at an unprecedented rate. So should we be disbanding business schools and asking people to forget and learn again? And if so, how do we do it?
I don't think abandoning business schools and saying forget everything they taught is really the right approach, is it? But I do think there's an argument to go back to 19th century economics, for example, and talk about utility rather than talk about economic wealth, and start from there and build models based upon that. I mean, plenty of things happen in business schools that are actually constructive. It's not all destructive, however you might want to define that. And again, it's back to what we collectively want, not what you want or what I want. But yes, there's a need to rethink education, but that's nothing new, is it? There's always been a need to rethink education, and there's always been people who say the current education does not provide people with what they need. Saying that's great, but then you've got to say, so I'm going to change it, and this is how it needs to change. So it's over to you, Prem, to bring that change if you want it to happen.
Thank you so much, Professor Kratha. Now, over to you, Dr. Shivani.
Thank you so much, sir, for the answers. Questions are never ending, but due to restriction of time, we cannot entertain them all. Moving towards the end of the session, now I request Dr. Rakesh Jain, sir, coordinator of Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Kendra, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for vote of thanks. It was a wonderful session. I think everybody was enlightened by Professor Crowther's thought, VK Singh's thought, and we have a great time. Over to you, Dr. Diksha, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Krauter, once again for sparing the time to come. And all of us really enjoyed ourselves. And thanks to all the participants. It was really nice meeting everybody over this platform. Thank you and have a good day.
Have a good day.